Thousands of years ago, there existed a people who walked between two worlds. They were relatives of the people of Israel. They knew the true God. They spoke with Moses. They shared blood, history, and promises. But with the passage of time, that same people became one of the most dangerous enemies of God's plan. The Bible calls them the Midianites. It was they who offered refuge to Moses when he was fleeing for his life, and the same ones who later seduced Israel into idolatry, corruption, and spiritual destruction. Today, almost no one speaks of them, but their traces remain hidden in the deserts of the Middle East, on ancient trade routes, in town names, and, according to many researchers, even in lineages that still exist. Who were the Midianites really? Why did God treat them first as allies and later as enemies? And most disturbingly, where are they today? What you are about to hear reveals a history erased from time, but not from God's purpose. And when you understand who they were, you will understand why their legacy remains a living warning for our generation. To understand who the Midianites really were, we need to begin exactly where their history begins. In the book of Genesis, chapter 25, after the death of Sarah, Abraham's wife, something important occurs in the life of the patriarch. Abraham, already elderly, takes another wife named Keturah. This detail is not a simple genealogical data point. It is absolutely crucial for understanding the origin of the Midianites, because it reveals to us that this people was not just any nation among the many that surrounded Israel. They had Abraham's blood running through their veins. Genesis 25 verses 1 and 2 tell us clearly, Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah, and she bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Midian was one of the 6 sons that Abraham had with Keturah. This means something extraordinary. The Midianites were half-brothers of Isaac, and therefore direct blood relatives of the people of Israel. They shared the same patriarchal heritage, the same father who had received the call of God and the promises of the covenant. But Abraham, guided by the wisdom of God and understanding clearly what the plan of redemption was, made a decision that would mark the destiny of these children forever. Genesis 25, verses 5 and 6 tell us, "And Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac, but to the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts and sent them away from Isaac, his son, while he was still living toward the east, to the land of the east. Abraham separated the sons of Keturah from Isaac. He sent them toward the east, far from the promised land, far from the center of the covenant. Why did he do this? Because Abraham understood perfectly that Isaac was the son of the promise. God had established his covenant specifically with Isaac, not with the other sons. This separation was not an act of cruel rejection, but a necessary measure to protect and preserve God's redemptive plan. The Midianites settled in the region that we know today as northwestern Arabia, east of the Gulf of Aqaba. It was a mostly desert area, but crossed by important trade routes that connected Arabia with Egypt and Canaan. This explains why later in biblical history, we find them functioning as merchants and nomadic shepherds, movements that followed the routes of water and trade. Before continuing, I need to tell you something to you who are interested in this type of content. Very recently, some researchers discovered fragments of the Bible that had never been revealed before. In those fragments, there exist hidden enigmas, enigmatic creatures, erased characters, new prophecies about the end times, forbidden books, and accounts that were hidden for centuries, for obvious reasons. We cannot explain this in detail on public platforms. That is why we decided to create a separate video where we reveal all this content on our website. To watch it, click on the link that will be in the first pinned comment below this video. and discover everything that came to light with this new finding. Enter before they take it down. Now let us continue with the video. Here we need to stop at a point absolutely crucial for understanding the entire subsequent tragedy. The Midianites inherited something from Abraham, but they did not inherit everything. They received material goods, riches, livestock. They also received knowledge of the God of Abraham. Without a doubt, they heard the stories about how God had called their father from Ur of the Chaldeans, how he had promised him a numerous offspring like the stars of the sky, how he had provided the ram in place of Isaac on Mount Moriah. The Midianites knew these things, but they did not inherit the promise itself. They were not the chosen people to carry the line of the Messiah. They were not the bearers of the Abrahamic covenant. This distinction is absolutely fundamental for understanding everything that comes after. Being close to the truth is not the same as belonging to it. Knowing about God, knowing who He is, hearing stories about His mighty works, is not the same as knowing God in a covenant relationship and walking in obedience to Him. The Midianites knew who the God of Abraham was, but they did not walk in obedience to Him as their father had done. For several generations, the Midianites lived as a semi-nomadic people, dedicating themselves mainly to livestock herding and trade through desert routes. It was they, precisely, who bought Joseph from the hands of his brothers and took him as a slave to Egypt. According to what Genesis 37, verse 28 tells us, this detail shows us that the Midianites maintained a certain regular commercial relationship with the region of Canaan and with Egypt. They knew the routes, the markets, the opportunities for trade well. But it also shows us something deeper. The Midianites were present, although peripherally, at key moments in the history of God's people. They were not completely unaware of what God was doing with the descendants of Isaac. Now we need to advance several centuries in biblical history until we reach one of the most important moments in the relationship between the Midianites and the people of God. Moses, after killing the Egyptian who was beating a Hebrew, has to flee precipitously from Egypt because Pharaoh seeks to kill him. Exodus 2, verse 15 says, "And when Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian." What was Moses doing exactly in Midian? At the most obvious level, he was hiding, taking refuge from the wrath of Pharaoh. But at the deeper level, at the level of God's sovereign plan, Moses was being prepared. And here is the absolutely amazing detail that many overlook. God used the Midianites. This people descended from Abraham, but outside the covenant, in the formation of the deliverer of Israel, of the man who would take the people of God out of Egypt, in Midian. Moses met a man named Jethro, also called Reuel in some parts of the scripture. Exodus 2, verse 16 tells us, "And the priest of Midian had 7 daughters." This detail of Jethro's title is extremely significant. Jethro was a priest. But priest of whom? The biblical evidence, when we examine it carefully, strongly suggests that Jethro knew and worshipped the true God, the God of Abraham. He was not simply another pagan priest of local idols. When later Moses tells Jethro everything that God had done with Pharaoh and with the Egyptians, the whole story of the Exodus and of how Jehovah had delivered Israel, Jethro's reaction is absolutely revealing. Exodus 18, verses 10 and 11 record his words. "And Jethro said, 'Blessed be Jehovah, who delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of Pharaoh, and who delivered the people from the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that Jehovah is greater than all gods, for in that they acted proudly, he prevailed against them.'" So let us analyze this response carefully. This is not the reaction of someone who hears the name of Jehovah for the first time. This is not the surprise of someone who meets a completely unknown God. It is rather the response of someone who already knew Jehovah, who had already heard about him, who perhaps even worshipped him, but who now sees his power confirmed in an incontrovertible way, who now sees the greatness of Jehovah demonstrated over all the gods of Egypt. Jethro does not ask who Jehovah is. He blesses Jehovah. He declares that now he knows with confirmed knowledge that Jehovah is greater than all gods. Immediately after this declaration, Jethro offers burnt offerings and sacrifices to God and eats bread with Aaron and with all the elders of Israel before God. This is not a pagan religious act. It is worship of the true God performed in a way that the leaders of Israel accept and in which they participate. Even more, and this is equally significant, Jethro gives Moses a profoundly wise administrative advice on how to organize the people and delegate responsibilities to judge the cases of the people. In Exodus 18, verses 19 to 23, Jethro advises, "Hearken now unto my voice. I will give thee counsel, and God shall be with thee. Be thou for the people to God ward, that thou mayest bring the causes unto God, and thou shalt teach them ordinances and laws, and shalt show them the way wherein they must walk, and the work that they must do. Moreover, thou shalt provide out of all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, and rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. This counsel does not contradict any previous revelation of God. In fact, it is profoundly wise and completely consistent with the principles of justice and order that God himself would establish later in the law. And most importantly, Moses accepts it and implements it. Moses, the man who spoke face to face with God, the recipient of the law on Sinai, accepts the advice of his Midianite father-in-law. This shows us something crucial. There was true wisdom and genuine knowledge of God among the Midianites, at least in Jethro's family and probably in other circles of their society. Moses married Zipporah, one of Jethro's 7 daughters. And here is another extraordinarily significant detail that reveals how much knowledge of God existed among the Midianites. In Exodus 4, when Moses is on his way back to Egypt to fulfill the mission that God has given him, a terrifying incident occurs. God seeks to kill Moses because he had not circumcised his son, thus violating the covenant of Abraham. And it is Zipporah, a Midianite woman, who saves the situation. Exodus 4, verse 25 says, "Then Zipporah took a sharp stone and cut off the foreskin of her son and cast it at his feet and said, 'Surely a bloody husband art thou to me.'" Zipporah knew the covenant of circumcision. A Midianite woman knew and respected the sign of the covenant that God had established with Abraham. She knew that circumcision was not optional, that it was a command of God, that it was necessary. This confirms absolutely that the Midianites had not completely forgotten their Abrahamic heritage. They retained knowledge of the things of God. There is another significant moment that we need to examine. When Israel is about to depart from Mount Sinai toward the Promised Land, Moses says to Hobab, his Midianite brother-in-law, brother of Zipporah, or perhaps another name for the same Jethro, "We are journeying unto the place of which Jehovah said, I will give it unto you. Come thou with us, and we will do thee good. For Jehovah hath spoken good concerning Israel." This is a direct invitation. Moses is inviting the Midianites, represented by Hobab, to join the people of God completely, to be part of the promise, to enter the promised land together with Israel. And here is the tragedy that begins to unfold. The scripture does not tell us with absolute clarity if Hobab finally accepted or not. There are indications in Judges that some Kenites related to the Midianites did join Israel. But what we know with certainty is that the Midianites, as a people, as a nation, did not integrate into Israel. They preferred to maintain their own separate identity, their own traditions, their own land, their own way of living. This was the absolutely fatal decision. The Midianites were at the most important crossroads of their history. They had the opportunity to join the people of the covenant completely, to be part of the promises of Abraham fully, to enter the land that God had promised. But they said no. Or at least they did not say yes in a complete and definitive way. They were close to the truth. They knew the true God. They had seen his power. They had been blessed with the privilege of forming the deliverer of Israel. But they did not want to commit themselves completely to him, nor to his people. They wanted to maintain a certain autonomy, a certain distance, a certain independence, and this decision would lead them directly to spiritual catastrophe. Now we reach the absolute breaking point in the history of the Midianites. The moment where everything positive they had, all their knowledge of God, all their Abrahamic heritage becomes their greatest condemnation. Israel is camped on the plains of Moab, on the other side of the Jordan, right in front of Jericho, ready to finally enter Canaan after 40 years in the desert. The Moabites and the Midianites are absolutely terrified. Numbers 22, verse 4, says, "And Moab said unto the elders of Midian, Now shall this company lick up all that are round about us, as the ox licketh up the grass of the field." Balak, the king of Moab, forms a specific alliance with the princes of Midian. And here is the strategy they develop together. They know they cannot defeat Israel with swords, because they have seen what God has done with the Egyptians, with the Amorites, with all those who have opposed Israel. God is with them. Fighting against Israel is fighting against God himself. So they decide to hire a prophet named Balaam, son of Beor, to curse Israel. If they cannot destroy Israel physically, they will try to destroy them spiritually, cutting off their relationship with God. Balaam is one of the most complex and tragic characters in the entire Bible. He was a true prophet who really listened to God. Numbers 22, verse 8, shows that Balaam says to the messengers of Balak, "Lodge here this night, and I will bring you word again, as Jehovah shall speak unto me." This is not generic pagan language. Balaam knew Jehovah specifically. He expected a word from Jehovah. He had some type of relationship with the true God. But there was a huge problem, a fatal flaw in his character. His heart was divided. He loved money. He loved honor. He loved the reward that Balak offered him more than he loved the truth and the will of God. God tells him clearly, without any ambiguity, not to go with the messengers of Balak, not to curse Israel because they are blessed. But Balaam keeps negotiating, keeps looking for some way, some angle, some possibility of obtaining Balak's reward and disobeying God completely. This is precisely the principle of all spiritual corruption, knowing perfectly the will of God, but looking for creative ways to evade it or twist it when it does not suit us, when it costs us something we do not want to lose. Balak takes Balaam to 3 different places, 3 distinct locations from where they can see the camp of Israel, hoping that from some of those positions Balaam can finally curse Israel. But each time, again and again, God puts words of blessing in Balaam's mouth. In Numbers 23, verse 8, Balaam utters words that must have torn his heart because they completely contradicted his desire to obtain the reward. "How shall I curse, whom God hath not cursed? Or how shall I defy, whom Jehovah hath not defied?" The prophecies that Balaam utters over Israel are extraordinarily beautiful and powerful. He speaks of Israel as a people dwelling apart, not being reckoned among the nations. He speaks of their multitude like the dust of the earth. And in Numbers 24, verse 17, Balaam prophesies about the Messiah himself. "I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him." but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy all the children of Sheth. Here is the absolutely bitter and tragic irony. Balaam utters prophetic truths about the Messiah with his lips. He speaks of the king who would come from Israel, of the Savior of the world, while his heart is simultaneously planning the destruction of the people of that same Messiah. He knows the truth enough to prophesy it with precision, but he does not love it enough to obey it. This is the maximum danger of knowledge without transformation, of revelation without surrender. Are you liking the video? Do not forget to click on the link in the first pinned comment at the end to watch the video that shows the fragments of the Bible that had never been revealed before. In those fragments exist hidden enigmas, enigmatic creatures, erased characters, new prophecies about the end times, forbidden books, and accounts that were hidden for centuries. Click on the link that will be in the first pinned comment below this video and discover everything that came to light in this new finding. When Balaam finally understands that he cannot curse Israel, that God simply will not permit it, he gives absolutely perverse advice to Balak and to the princes of Midian. Numbers 31, verse 16, reveals it clearly. Behold, these caused the children of Israel, through the counsel of Balaam, to commit trespass against Jehovah in the matter of Pur. And there was a plague among the congregation of Jehovah. The plan was diabolically simple, but devastatingly effective. If you cannot destroy Israel from the outside, corrupt them from the inside. If you cannot defeat them with swords, seduce them with sin. If you cannot make God curse them directly, make them provoke the wrath of their God themselves by sinning against him. Make Israel break their own covenant with God. The Midianites and Moabites executed Balaam's plan with calculated precision. They sent their most beautiful women to seduce the men of Israel. But this was not simply casual sexual immorality. It was a coordinated spiritual attack, designed to destroy Israel's relationship with God. It was deliberate religious syncretism. Numbers 25, verses 1 to 3, describe what happened. And Israel abode in Shittim, and the people began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab. And they called the people unto the sacrifices of their gods. And the people did eat, and bowed down to their gods. And Israel joined himself unto Baal-peor. And the anger of Jehovah was kindled against Israel. This was an absolutely coordinated and deliberate attack. The whoredom led directly to idolatry. Illicit sexual relations opened the door to false worship. The Israelites began to participate in the sexual rituals of Baal-peor, a Canaanite god of fertility, whose cult included ritual prostitution as part of its worship. God's response was immediate, severe, and terrifying. Numbers 25, verse 9 says, And those that died in the plague were 24,000. 24,000 Israelites died in a plague sent by God because of this spiritual seduction. But note something absolutely crucial. The judgment did not fall only on Israel. The Midianites, who had orchestrated this diabolical plan, would also receive their punishment, and it would be complete and devastating. Why was the sin of Pur so grave? Why did it provoke such a severe judgment on both Israel and Midian? Because it represented the mixture, the compromise, the normalization of sin within the people of God. The Israelites did not completely abandon Jehovah. They did not openly say they no longer believed in him. They simply added Baal-peor to their worship. They remained religious. They continued offering sacrifices. They continued considering themselves the people of God. But now they also served Baal-peor. They wanted to have Jehovah and also the sensual experiences of the cult of Baal. They wanted the identity of being the people of the covenant, but also the moral freedom of the pagans. And God said, "No." God never accepts the mixture. God never tolerates syncretism. Either we are completely His or we are not His at all. And the Midianites were the deliberate and conscious instruments of this spiritual corruption. They who knew the true God by direct heritage from Abraham, who had seen His power manifested in Egypt through Moses, who had had the unique privilege of welcoming and forming the deliverer of Israel, now used all that knowledge, all that proximity to the truth to plan the spiritual downfall and the destruction of the people of God. They knew the truth enough to know exactly how to attack it, how to corrupt it, how to destroy it. They used their knowledge of God not to draw near to Him, but to push others away from Him. This is the gravest possible sin, to know the truth and deliberately twist it to destroy others. After the plague that killed 24,000 Israelites in Peor, God gives a direct and specific order to Moses. Numbers 25, verses 16 to 18 say, "And Jehovah spake unto Moses, saying, Vex the Midianites, and smite them, for they vex you with their wiles, wherewith they have beguiled you in the matter of Peor." This was not a human decision of personal revenge. It was not Moses acting out of anger or desire for retribution. It was a direct command from God. The judgment came from the throne of heaven itself. Why so severe? Why so complete? Because the Midianites did not attack Israel with swords on the battlefield, which would have been a normal war between nations. They attacked the soul of Israel, their fundamental relationship with God, their identity as the people of the covenant. They tried to corrupt spiritually the people that God had chosen to bring the Messiah into the world. This was not a political or territorial conflict. It was a spiritual attack against God's redemptive plan for all humanity. Numbers 31 records the complete execution of this judgment. Verse 2 says, "We avenged the children of Israel of the Midianites. Afterward shalt thou be gathered unto thy people." This would be the last mission of Moses before his death, his ministry, which had begun in Midian, in the land of his refuge and formation, would end with the judgment on Midian. Israel gathered an army of 12,000 men, exactly 1,000 from each of the 12 tribes. Numbers 31, verse 7 says, "And they warred against the Midianites, as Jehovah commanded Moses, and they slew all the males." The judgment was complete and exhaustive. It was not partial. It was not selective. It was total. Numbers 31, verse 8, specifies the details. "And they slew the kings of Midian, beside the rest of them that were slain, namely, Evi, and Rechem, and Zur, and Hur, and Reba, 5 kings of Midian. Balaam also the son of Beor they slew with the sword. The 5 Midianite kings died." This means that the entire political leadership structure of the nation was eliminated. But note especially the last name on that list, Balaam. Balaam was there with the Midianites, the prophet who had blessed Israel with his lips, but conspired against them with his heart, the man who could not curse Israel directly, but taught the Midianites how to destroy them indirectly, died together with those he had counseled. His death confirms absolutely his total complicity in the plan of Peor. Balaam received what his actions deserved. When the Israelite army returned with the spoils and the captives, Moses was extremely angry because they had left all the women alive. Numbers 31, verses 15 and 16, record his reaction. "And Moses said unto them, Have ye saved all the women alive? Behold, these caused the children of Israel, through the counsel of Balaam, to commit trespass against Jehovah in the matter of Peor. And there was a plague among the congregation of Jehovah." Moses understood perfectly the absolute gravity of the sin of Peor. It was not simply a moment of collective moral weakness. It was not only young Israelites committing errors of immaturity. It was a deliberate, calculated, and malicious plot to spiritually destroy Israel. And the Midianite women had been the central instrument, the main tool of that diabolical plot. The order was to execute all the women who had known a man, but to preserve the virgin girls who had not yet participated in the rituals of pure. This distinction was not arbitrary or cruel. The women who had participated actively in the ritual seduction of Israel, who had been a conscious part of the plan to corrupt the people of God, were judged for their actions. The innocent girls who had not participated were preserved, and according to the law of Moses, could be integrated into the people of Israel after a period of ceremonial purification. The spoils of war were enormous: 675,000 sheep, 72,000 oxen, 61,000 donkeys, and 32,000 virgin women. Of all this, a specific portion was given to the Levites and to the Lord as a heave offering. Numbers 31, verse 54, concludes this episode. And Moses and Eleazar the priest took the gold of the captains of thousands and of hundreds, and brought it into the tabernacle of the congregation, for a memorial for the children of Israel before Jehovah. This gold was placed specifically in the tabernacle as a permanent memorial. Memorial of what exactly? Of God's judgment on those who attempt to corrupt his people. An eternal reminder, visible every time they entered the holy place, that God does not tolerate syncretism, does not accept the mixture, does not forgive the deliberate spiritual seduction of his people. This judgment may seem extremely harsh to our modern sensitivity. We live in an age that values tolerance above almost everything else, that considers any absolute judgment as something negative. But we need to understand this event in its full context. The Midianites were not ignorant. They were not pagans who had never heard about the true God. They knew the God of Abraham because they descended from Abraham. They had seen the power of God manifested in Egypt through Moses. Jethro had worshipped Jehovah and offered sacrifices. Zipporah knew the covenant of circumcision. The Midianites had knowledge. They had light. They had truth. Nevertheless, deliberately and consciously, they planned the spiritual destruction of Israel. It was not a mistake. It was not ignorance. It was conscious and malicious rebellion against a God they knew. Furthermore, the judgment was not absolutely total in the sense of complete genocide. The virgin girls were preserved. Some Midianites who lived in other regions who had not participated in the plot of pure survived. But the heart of the Midianite nation, its leadership structure, its corrupt religious institutions, its power as an organized nation, all that was completely eliminated. This judgment established a permanent principle throughout the scripture. God is extraordinarily patient and merciful, but there is a limit. When a people or a person crosses the line of deliberately attempting to corrupt the people of God, of attacking God's redemptive plan, of using the knowledge of the truth to destroy others spiritually, the judgment comes and it is complete. After Numbers 31, mentions of the Midianites in the Bible are scarce but revealing. In Judges chapter 6-8, we find that a group of Midianites, together with Amalekites and other peoples of the east, severely oppressed Israel for 7 years. But this was no longer the organized Midian of before. They were nomadic bands, scattered groups, without the national structure they had had. God raised up Gideon to deliver his people from this oppression. This Midianite group was defeated again decisively. Judges 8, verse 28 says, "Thus was Midian subdued before the children of Israel, so that they lifted up their heads no more. And the country was in quietness 40 years in the days of Gideon. They lifted up their heads no more." This phrase is definitive. After the defeat under Gideon, the Midianites disappear completely as a significant political and national entity from the pages of Scripture. Their name persists only in historical references, in accounts of God's past judgments, and in the Psalms that remember Jehovah's great victories over the enemies of Israel. But as a people, as a nation, as a political or military force, they cease to exist. Psalm 83, verse 9, mentions them together with other historical enemies of Israel. Do unto them as unto the Midianites, as to Sisera, as to Jabin, at the brook of Kizon. The Midianites became a permanent example of God's judgment. But although the Midianites disappeared physically as a nation, their name and their history remained forever as a prophetic symbol. When the Apostle Peter writes his second letter and warns about false teachers who would infiltrate the church, he mentions Balaam specifically. 2 Peter 2, verse 15 says, "Which have forsaken the right way, and are gone astray, following the way of Balaam the son of Bosor, who loved the wages of unrighteousness." The Apostle Jude, in his brief but powerful letter, also mentions Balaam as an example of those who know the truth, but corrupt it for money. Jude, verse 11, says, "Woe unto them, for they have gone in the way of Cain, and ran greedily after the error of Balaam for reward, and perished in the gainsaying of Kor, and most strikingly of all, in Revelation 2, verse 14, the resurrected and glorified Christ, walking in the midst of the candlesticks that represent his churches, says to the church of Pergamos, But I have a few things against thee, because thou hast there them that hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to cast a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed unto idols, and to commit fornication. The Lord himself uses the sin of Balaam and the Midianites as a warning to his church, almost 100 years after the event. The history of the Midianites became the permanent, eternal biblical example of spiritual seduction, of compromise with the world, of the danger of knowing the truth, but using it for corrupt ends, of the syncretism that mixes the holy with the profane. Where are the Midianites today? Physically, as a distinct people with national identity, they ceased to exist more than 2,500 years ago. They scattered completely. They mixed with other Arab populations of the desert, or were absorbed into other ethnic groups of the region. There are no Midianites today who can trace their lineage directly to Midian, son of Abraham. The geographic region where they lived, the northwestern part of the Arabian Peninsula, is today part of Saudi Arabia and Jordan. The ancient trade routes they controlled long ago ceased to have the importance they had in antiquity. The cities they built literally turned into desert dust. Physically, the Midianites disappeared from history, but spiritually, prophetically, the spirit of Midian is still alive. It lives every time someone who knows the truth of God deliberately twists it for their own benefit or to destroy others. It lives every time a believer who has received light, who knows the Word, who has experienced the grace of God, accepts compromise with the world, and drags others with him. It lives every time sin is normalized within the people of God. When the mixture is accepted, when syncretism is tolerated, when it is said that we can have God and also the practices of the world, it lives every time someone uses the knowledge of the things of God, not to glorify God, but to manipulate, control, or corrupt other believers. The history of the Midianites teaches us absolutely essential truths that we need to engrave in our hearts. First truth: spiritual heritage does not guarantee personal salvation. The Midianites were direct descendants of Abraham. They had his blood. They knew the stories of the covenant, but that did not save them from judgment. Being close to the truth, knowing about God, having a Christian heritage, growing up in a believing family, attending church all life. None of these things guarantees that we really know God in a saving relationship. What matters is not simply knowing about God, but obeying God, walking with God, surrendering completely to God. Second crucial truth: Spiritual seduction is infinitely more dangerous than open persecution. The Midianites did not attack Israel with armies because they knew they would lose. God had demonstrated his power too many times, so they attacked with something much more subtle and devastating, with moral permissiveness, with religious mixture, with the gradual normalization of sin, and they almost destroyed Israel completely from within. The Church of Christ has survived centuries of brutal persecution, but the seduction of the world, compromise with the culture, the syncretism that mixes the truth of God with the lies of the world, this has destroyed more churches, more denominations, more believers than all the persecutions in history combined. Third, prophetic truth. God judges syncretism and mixture severely. The Israelites in Pur did not completely abandon Jehovah. They did not say they no longer believed in him. They simply added Baal Peor to their religious life. They thought they could have both. They thought they could maintain their identity as the people of God, while participating also in the sensual practices of the Canaanites. And God sent a plague that killed 24,000 of them in a single day. God never ever, in any circumstance, accepts the mixture. Either we are completely his, without reservations, without secret areas of compromise, or we are not truly his at all. Fourth truth. There are eternal consequences for deliberately corrupting the people of God. The Midianites paid with their existence as a nation. Balaam died by the sword. But more than that, their names remained forever in the scripture as a warning, as an example of judgment, as a symbol of everything God abhors. Those who today know the truth of the gospel, but deliberately twist it, who use their knowledge of the things of God to manipulate or corrupt other believers, who teach doctrines that lead the people of God into compromise with the world, face severe judgment. James 3, verse 1, warns, "My brethren, be not many masters, knowing that we shall receive the greater condemnation." The Midianites began with so much potential. They were direct family of Abraham. They knew the true God from their origins. They had the unique privilege of welcoming and forming Moses, the deliverer of Israel. Jethro worshipped Jehovah and offered acceptable sacrifices. Zipporah knew the covenant of circumcision. They had multiple opportunities to join the people of the covenant completely, to be part of the promises fully. But at some crucial moment, they made fatal decisions. They preferred to remain separate from the people of God. They preferred their own traditions, their own local gods, their own autonomy. And finally, when they saw Israel as a threat, they actively conspired to destroy them spiritually. They used all their knowledge of God, not to draw near to him, but to push others away from him. The result was their complete destruction. Not only physical destruction as a nation, but destruction of their historical legacy. Their only heritage is to be remembered eternally as an example of apostasy, of spiritual betrayal, of deserved judgment. Their name appears in the Bible only as a warning. When Christ himself speaks to his church in Revelation, he mentions the Midianites as a symbol of everything that must be avoided. This is a tragedy of cosmic proportions. A people who could have been part of God's redemptive plan ended up being an eternal example of how not to live. The question that remains for us, the question that each one of us must answer honestly before God, is absolutely personal. Where are we in this story? Are we like the Midianites who knew the truth, but did not obey it completely? Are we close to God, in knowledge, in biblical information, in years of church attendance, but far from him in obedience, practice, and total surrender? Are we normalizing small compromises with the world, telling ourselves they are not really important, that God understands that everyone does it? Are we maintaining areas of our life where we want autonomy, where we do not want God to interfere? The warning of the Midianites is clear as crystal. It is not enough to have a spiritual heritage. It is not enough to know the Bible intellectually. It is not enough to be close to the church or have Christian friends. What God seeks, what God demands, what God requires is complete obedience, total consecration, absolute rejection of syncretism and compromise with the world. We cannot serve two masters. We cannot have God and also the world. We cannot maintain our Christian identity while participating in the practices that God clearly condemns in His Word. The Midianites had every imaginable opportunity. They knew God. They saw His power manifested in incontrovertible ways. They could have been part of the chosen people fully, but they chose their own path. They chose autonomy over obedience. They chose mixture over consecration. They chose finally to attack the people of God rather than join Him, and they paid the ultimate price: complete destruction and eternal remembrance, only as a warning that we do not commit the same fatal mistake. May we not be satisfied with being close to the truth without living fully in it. May we not normalize sin, nor accept gradual compromise with the world. May we not use our knowledge of the things of God for our own glory or benefit instead of for His glory. The history of the Midianites is a solemn and eternal warning. The greatest danger is not being far from God without knowing Him, but being close to Him, knowing His truth, and still choosing deliberately to live without obeying Him completely. May God give us grace to hear this warning, to learn from this tragic history, and to live in total and unreserved obedience to His Word and to His will for our lives. And now, click on the link in the first pinned comment down here to watch the video that shows the fragments of the Bible that were discovered recently and know everything that has been hidden from you for so long. Watch it before they take it down. Have you ever wondered where the peoples that transformed America over centuries really came from? Historians and archaeologists have immersed themselves in a fascinating mystery that challenges our understanding of human history. The Mayans, the Aztecs, and the Incas were not simple ancient cultures, but sophisticated empires that dominated entire continents with a precision almost impossible to imagine. But here is the question that awakens deep curiosity. Where did these peoples really come from? How did they manage to develop in such distinct regions, separated by thousands of kilometers of inhospitable terrain, and yet share surprisingly similar cultural characteristics? Does there exist some hidden connection between their histories and the ancient accounts that we find in sacred texts? Imagine for a moment that you are an archaeologist discovering a lost city in the jungle, or a geneticist analyzing ancient DNA that reveals unexpected connections with distant civilizations. In this extraordinary journey, we will explore perspectives that go from revolutionary scientific findings to ancestral narratives transmitted for millennia. We will discover how modern genetics, rigorous archaeology, and ancient scriptures converge to reveal a history much more complex and captivating than you ever imagined. The truth is that these peoples did not emerge from nothing. Their roots extend deeply into the past, connecting them with ancient migrations, extraordinary adaptations, and achievements that continue to challenge our understanding. So stay with us while we unravel the secrets that these civilizations kept for millennia. Secrets that are being revealed by modern science and rigorous historical research. Imagine a civilization that could predict solar eclipses with a precision that rivaled modern astronomy centuries before Galileo looked through his telescope. The Mayans were not just builders of pyramids, they were brilliant mathematicians, visionary astronomers, and philosophers who understood the cycles of the universe in a way that challenges our contemporary understanding. Distributed along a vast territory that spanned southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador, the Mayans established city-states that functioned as independent centers of political, religious, and cultural power. Tikal, the largest Mayan city, rose in the heart of the Petanera jungle with pyramids that reached heights of more than 60 meters. Palenque, located in the mountains of Chiapas, was known for its refined architecture and its detailed hieroglyphic inscriptions. Chichen Itza, on the Yucatan Peninsula, was a center of power that attracted pilgrims from all over Mesoamerica. These were not simple settlements, but vibrant metropolises where religion, science, and politics were intertwined in every aspect of daily life. Ceremonial plazas were surrounded by temples, palaces, and observatories. Markets buzzed with activity, with merchants bringing products from distant regions. Priests studied the movements of the stars from specially constructed observatories. What distinguished the Mayans was their almost religious obsession with time and space. They developed not one, but several calendars, each with different purposes. The hub of 365 days aligned with the solar year. The Tzolk'in of 260 days was used for ritual and divinatory purposes. These two calendars combined in a cycle of 52 years called the calendrical wheel. But the most surprising was their long count, a system that recorded time from an ancient point of origin, allowing the Mayans to track historical events with precision. Their system of hieroglyphic writing carved in stone and preserved in tree bark codices allows us to access directly their thoughts, their beliefs, and their intellectual achievements. Each glyph is a miniature work of art, a window to a mind that saw the world in a way completely different from ours. The Mayan hieroglyphs were not simple pictograms. They were a complex system that combined logograms that represented complete words with phonetic signs that represented individual sounds. Mayan religion permeates every aspect of their civilization. Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, was not simply a deity, but a representation of the cosmic balance that the Mayans believed had to be maintained through elaborate rituals and ceremonial sacrifices. These rituals were not acts of barbarism, but expressions of a deep cosmology where the universe required to be constantly fed and renewed to continue existing. The Mayans believed that they lived in the fourth creation of the world and that the universe had been destroyed and recreated several times previously. However, around the 9th century, Mayan cities began to mysteriously depopulate. Internal wars between rival city-states drained resources and lives. Climate changes, including prolonged droughts, made agriculture increasingly difficult. The exhaustion of natural resources, especially deforestation to build and maintain the cities, probably conspired to weaken this civilization. But here is the fascinating thing. The Mayans never disappeared completely. Their descendants live today in the region, keeping alive a heritage that dates back thousands of years, speaking Mayan languages, practicing ancestral traditions, and preserving knowledge that has been transmitted from generation to generation. Now let us travel toward the north, to the heart of Mexico, where a history of epic migration in this current world. We see increasingly more people going against traditional principles, and it seems that the immoral is increasingly present. It is common to feel disoriented and without direction. However, there still exists a path to recover the true essence and re-establish ethical principles in our daily routine. If you feel lost in the midst of confusion and desire more clarity, we have something special for you, a resource created especially to help you understand the meaning of these current challenges and face them with wisdom and courage. This is the true value of Paths of Revelation, deciphering the Bible completely, a path toward clarity and serenity through its teachings. The best of all is that it is available now in the first pinned comment. Do not miss this opportunity to transform your life and discover the genuine purpose of these challenges. Now let us return to the main topic of the video. Divine prophecy and conquest developed over centuries. The Aztecs, also known as Mexica, arrived in the Valley of Mexico as a nomadic and relatively weak people. Guided by a divine vision of their patron god Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun, according to their legend, Huitzilopochtli ordered them to search for a specific place where they would find an eagle perched on a nopal devouring a serpent. After generations of pilgrimage facing hunger, diseases, and conflicts with hostile peoples in 1325, the Aztecs discovered exactly that sign on an island in Lake Texcoco. They interpreted this as the divine confirmation that they had arrived at their promised destination, the place where to establish their empire. Thus was born Tenochtitlan, the city of the Aztecs. What happened next was extraordinary and without precedent. In less than 2 centuries, Tenochtitlan transformed into one of the largest and most sophisticated cities in the world, with a population that probably exceeded 200,000 inhabitants. It rivaled the great European metropolises of the time, like Venice, Paris, and London. The Spaniards who saw it were marveled by its grandiosity, its canals that crisscrossed like an American Venice, its causeways that connected it to the continent, and its Tlatelolco market, which was one of the largest ever seen. The Spanish chroniclers described markets where everything from fresh food to luxury goods were sold, from tools to works of art. The Tlatelolco market could house more than 60,000 people on a market day. The Spaniards were astonished by the organization, the variety of products, and the wealth they saw in these commercial transactions. The Triple Alliance formed in 1428 between Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan was the catalyst of the Aztec expansion. This military and political coalition allowed the Aztecs to conquer and subdue numerous city-states, creating an empire that extended from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific, from northern Mexico to Central America. Each conquest brought tributes, food, textiles, obsidian, and most importantly, for the Aztecs, prisoners of war. Aztec religion was intensely militaristic and cosmological. The Aztecs believed that the sun needed to be fed constantly to continue its daily journey through the sky. Without this food, the universe would sink into darkness and chaos. This food was human blood, considered the precious water that sustained cosmic life. The flowery wars were not conflicts for territory or economic resources, but campaigns organized specifically to capture prisoners destined for ritual sacrifice. For the Aztecs, this was not cruelty. It was a cosmic obligation, a sacred responsibility that they carried with deep religious seriousness. In the heart of Tenochtitlan rose the Great Temple, a colossal complex dedicated to Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc, the god of rain. This temple was not a simple building. It was an artificial mountain, a representation of Coatepec, the sacred mountain where, according to Aztec mythology, Huitzilopochtli was born. From its stairways, the priests performed rituals that, according to them, kept the universe in balance. The city was a reflection of their worldview, a sacred space where the divine and the earthly met constantly. While the Aztecs dominated Mesoamerica in the south, in the Andes Mountains, another empire was reaching its peak. The Tawantinsuyu, or the four parts together in Quechua, was the largest empire in pre-Columbian America, extending from southern Colombia to northern Argentina, spanning territories in Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. The Incas were not the first in the region. There were earlier civilizations like the Chavin, the Moche, and the Nazca, but under the leadership of Pachacutec in the 15th century, they transformed what was a regional kingdom into a continental empire that rivaled in size with the contemporary European empires. Pachacutec was not only a military conqueror, he was an administrative visionary who completely reorganized the Incan state, creating systems of governance that allowed the efficient control of millions of people scattered in challenging terrains. The capital Cusco was conceived as the navel of the world, the sacred center from which Incan power radiated. According to Incan mythology, Manco Capac and Mama Oclo emerged from Lake Titicaca, sent by Inti, the sun god, to civilize humanity. They founded Cusco, which became the spiritual, administrative, and political center of the empire. The city was designed with astronomical precision, its streets and buildings aligned with significant celestial points, reflecting the deep connection of the Incas with the cosmos. What distinguished the Incas was their extraordinary capacity to build infrastructure in impossible terrains. The Capixnan, or Great Road, extended for more than 40,000 kilometers, connecting every corner of the empire from the Pacific coasts to the mountain peaks. These roads included vegetable fiber suspension bridges that swayed over dizzying gorges, an engineering achievement that amazes even today. The tambos, or rest stations, were strategically located every day of travel, providing shelter and supplies to travelers. The chasquis, elite messengers, could transmit messages from Cusco to the confines of the empire in a matter of days, a system of communication that was more efficient than many contemporary European systems. Incan agriculture was equally innovative. The Incas transformed the mountain slopes into cultivation terraces that not only prevented erosion, but also allowed agricultural production at altitudes where other peoples considered it impossible to cultivate. They developed sophisticated irrigation systems that channeled water from the mountains toward the fields, demonstrating a deep knowledge of hydraulics and civil engineering. The Incas cultivated hundreds of potato varieties adapted to different altitudes and climates, demonstrating sophisticated agricultural knowledge. Machu Picchu, the most famous Incan citadel, is a testimony of this mastery. Built high on a mountain at more than 2,400 meters of altitude, this sacred city was designed to harmonize perfectly with its natural environment. Each stone was cut with precision and placed without mortar, an architectural achievement that continues to baffle modern engineers. Archaeologists still debate the exact purpose of Machu Picchu, but many believe it was a sacred site, possibly a royal residence or an important ceremonial center. Now we reach a fundamental question that has intrigued scientists for decades. Where did these peoples really come from? Modern science has provided surprising answers that connect the indigenous peoples of America with ancient Asian populations in ways that defy imagination. Genetic studies have revolutionized our understanding of human origins through the analysis of mitochondrial DNA, which is inherited exclusively from the mother. Scientists have identified deep connections between the indigenous peoples of America and the populations of northeastern Asia, particularly from Siberia and Mongolia. The analysis of mitochondrial DNA has identified specific haplogroups that are common in both Native Americans and Asian populations. Haplogroups A, B, C, and D found in many indigenous American communities are also found in Siberia and Mongolia, suggesting a shared common ancestor who lived thousands of years ago. This discovery was revolutionary because it provided molecular evidence of a connection that anthropologists had suspected for years based on archaeological evidence. The most widely accepted theory is that during the last glacial age, approximately 15,000 to 20,000 years ago, a land bridge called Beringia connected Siberia with Alaska. This land bridge, which today is submerged under the Bering Strait, probably had hundreds of kilometers in width and provided a land corridor between two continents. During this period, the sea level was significantly lower because enormous amounts of water were frozen in ice sheets. This land bridge allowed groups of hunters and gatherers to follow herds of animals like mammoths, bisons, and elks from Asia toward North America, once on the American continent. These first migrants dispersed gradually, adapting to diverse environments, from the northern tundras to the southern tropical jungles, developing the cultures that eventually would become the Mayans, Aztecs, and Incas. But here is the fascinating thing. The evidence suggests that it was not a single migration, but multiple waves of migration that occurred over thousands of years. Each wave probably brought different groups with their own cultures, technologies, and traditions. The first wave could have arrived 20,000 years ago, while later waves continued to arrive during the following 10,000 years. This diversity of origins explains the variety of languages, traditions, and physical characteristics that we observe among the indigenous peoples of America. The analysis of the Y chromosome, which is inherited by the paternal line, has identified groups like Q and C, which also connect Native Americans with Asian populations. These multiple, independent, and convergent findings provide a solid base for the theory of Asian migration. When different methods of genetic analysis arrive at similar conclusions, the confidence in those conclusions increases significantly. Once these first migrants arrived in America, they faced completely new environments that required extraordinary adaptation. The peoples who settled in different regions developed distinct physical characteristics as a result of thousands of years of evolution and natural selection. Skin color, for example, varied significantly among the indigenous groups. The peoples of the north, who migrated to regions of lower solar exposure, tended to maintain lighter skin tones, while those who settled in tropical regions developed darker tones as an adaptation to higher solar exposure and the need to synthesize vitamin D efficiently. This process of adaptation occurred over millennia, demonstrating how the human body can change in response to environmental pressures. Similarly, facial structure, hair type, and other physical characteristics reflected adaptations to specific climates and diets. The peoples of the Andean Mountains, for example, developed improved respiratory capacities to function at high altitudes where oxygen is scarce. Medical studies have shown that Andean peoples have a higher concentration of hemoglobin in the blood, allowing them to transport oxygen more efficiently in high-altitude environments. These biological changes occurred over millennia, demonstrating the extraordinary capacity of the human body to adapt to new environments. The peoples who settled in coastal regions developed diets based on marine resources, which influenced their nutrition and potentially their physical development. The peoples of the tropical jungles developed sophisticated knowledge about medicinal and edible plants, allowing them to thrive in environments that others considered inhospitable. The genetic diversity among the indigenous peoples of America reflects this complex history of migrations, adaptations, and intercultural contacts. Although all shared a common ancestor in Asia, thousands of years of separation and adaptation to different environments resulted in a remarkable variety of genetic and physical characteristics. For some believers, the Bible offers a complementary perspective on the origins of the indigenous peoples of America, which enriches scientific understanding. According to Genesis, after the universal flood, Noah and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, dispersed to repopulate the earth. Genesis 10:25 provides a detailed genealogy of the descendants of Japheth: Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshesh, and Tiras. Some biblical interpreters suggest that these names could be related to migrations toward Asia and eventually toward America. The theory proposes that the descendants of Japheth moved toward the north and the east, reaching Siberia and Mongolia, and that their later descendants crossed the Bering Strait toward the New World. This theory, although speculative, provides a narrative framework that some find enriching. Although this connection is more symbolic than literal, it offers an interesting narrative framework that some find enriching. The idea of a global dispersion of peoples after a catastrophic event has parallels in many ancient cultures, including the Mesoamerican ones. The notion that humanity dispersed from a central point of origin is an idea that appears in many religious and mythological traditions. Togarma, another grandson of Noah, is sometimes mentioned in legends and traditions as the ancestor of Asian peoples. According to these stories, the descendants of Togarmah emigrated toward the east and the north, establishing civilizations in Central and Eastern Asia. The connection between Togarmah and the indigenous peoples of America is an extension of the Japheth theory, suggesting that these migrations continued through Beringia toward the New World. Curiously, the flood account is not exclusive to the biblical tradition. Many ancient cultures, including the Mayans, had stories of cataclysmic floods that destroyed previous civilizations. The Popol Vuh, one of the most important texts of Mesoamerican mythology, describes cycles of creation and destruction, where the gods created and destroyed several versions of humanity before finally creating human beings from corn. In the Popol Vuh, the first attempt to create humanity resulted in beings made of mud that crumbled. The second attempt produced beings of wood that lacked a soul. Only in the third attempt, when the gods created human beings from corn, did they manage to create satisfactory beings. Each failure was followed by a destruction of the world, a flood, or a cataclysmic event that erased the previous creation. These similarities could suggest a collective memory of real cataclysmic events that occurred in antiquity, like massive floods or tsunamis that affected ancient populations. Alternatively, they could reflect universal archetypes that emerge persistently in the human psyche. The idea that the world has been destroyed and recreated, that humanity has failed and must start again. In any case, these connections between biblical traditions and Mesoamerican mythologies provide a fascinating ground for reflection and study. They suggest that despite geographic separation, ancient peoples shared concerns and similar visions about the nature of the world and humanity's place in it. Genesis 11:9 relates the story of the Tower of Babel, where God confused the languages of humanity, causing them to speak different languages and disperse throughout the earth. This narrative of dispersion and linguistic diversification has an intriguing parallel with the reality of pre-Columbian America. The indigenous peoples of America spoke literally hundreds of different languages, each with its own structure, vocabulary, and oral traditions. This linguistic diversity is so pronounced that some scholars consider it one of the greatest in the world. In Mexico alone, there were more than 300 different indigenous languages. In Peru, Quechua was the dominant language, but it coexisted with hundreds of other languages. In Guatemala, Quiche, Cachiquel, and Tsutujil were just some of the Mayan languages spoken. Some biblical interpreters see in this diversity an echo of the confusion of languages at Babel, suggesting that the peoples are part of this global dispersion. Although this interpretation is speculative, it highlights how linguistic diversity is a notable characteristic of pre-Columbian civilizations that could be interpreted in multiple ways. Although the classical Mayan civilization experienced a mysterious collapse around the 9th century, the Mayans never disappeared. Today, millions of descendants of the ancient Mayans live in Guatemala, Mexico, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador, keeping alive a heritage that dates back thousands of years. Mayan languages like Quiche, Yucatec, and Tzotzil are spoken by millions of people. These languages are not simply means of communication. They are vehicles to transmit traditional knowledge, ancestral stories, and cultural values that have been preserved through generations. Quiche, for example, is spoken by more than 1 million people in Guatemala. Yucatec is spoken by hundreds of thousands on the Yucatan Peninsula. Traditional agricultural practices like the cultivation of corn, beans, and squash remain essential in many Mayan communities. These techniques, based on knowledge transmitted for millennia, are vital for the subsistence of these communities and reflect a deep understanding of local ecology. The slash and burn system, although controversial from a modern environmental perspective, has been used for thousands of years and reflects sophisticated knowledge of crop rotation. Mayan art and contemporary craftsmanship, including weaving, pottery, and sculpture, continue techniques that date back to pre-Columbian times. Each piece created by modern Mayan artisans is not only functional, but also carries a deep cultural and spiritual meaning, connecting the present with the past. Mayan textiles, with their complex patterns and vibrant colors, are internationally recognized as works of art. The eagle perched on a nopal devouring a serpent is not only a symbol of ancient Tenochtitlan, it is the heart of the modern Mexican flag. This emblem that originally represented the divine prophecy that guided the Aztecs to their promised land now represents the national identity of Mexico, a symbol that unites millions of people under a common heritage. Modern Mexico City is built literally on the ruins of Tenochtitlan. When the Spaniards conquered the city in 1521, they built the Metropolitan Cathedral on the remains of the Great Temple, an act that symbolized the superimposition of cultures. Today, archaeologists continue unearthing Aztec artifacts, constantly revealing new details about this extraordinary civilization. In 1978, during excavations in the center of Mexico City, a monumental stone of the Great Temple was discovered, which led to extensive archaeological excavations that continue until today. Aztec influence permeates contemporary Mexican culture in profound and visible ways. The Spanish language spoken in Mexico contains numerous words of Nahuatl origin, the language of the Aztecs. Words like chocolate, tomato, avocado, coyote, pulque, chili, and tlacuache are direct linguistic legacies of the Aztec Empire. When a modern Mexican speaks Spanish, he is using words that connect directly with his Aztec ancestors. Mexican gastronomy, with its emphasis on corn, beans, and chili, reflects directly the diet that sustained the Aztec civilization. Mole, one of the most emblematic dishes of Mexico, is a fusion of Aztec culinary techniques with Spanish ingredients, reflecting the mixture of cultures that occurred after the conquest. Mexican festivities, like the Day of the Dead, mix Aztec beliefs about death with Spanish Catholic traditions, creating a unique celebration that is profoundly Mexican. In the Andes, the Incan legacy is equally palpable and profound. Millions of people in Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, and other Andean nations speak Quechua, the language of the Incan Empire. Although Spanish is the official language, Quechua continues to be a living language spoken in homes, markets, and traditional ceremonies. Quechua is spoken by more than 8 million people in the Andean region, which makes it one of the most spoken indigenous languages in America. Cusco, the ancient Incan capital, continues to be a spiritual and cultural center. Incan ruins are intertwined with colonial Spanish architecture, creating an urban landscape that is a living testimony of the superimposition of cultures. Incan walls, built without mortar with extraordinary precision, remain intact under Spanish colonial churches and houses, a physical reminder of the civilization that was conquered. Machu Picchu, discovered by the Western world in 1911 by Bingham, has become one of the most visited archaeological sites in the world, attracting millions of people who wish to connect with the greatness of the Incan Empire. This site, which was lost for centuries after the Spanish conquest, represents the peak of Incan engineering and architecture. Each year, more than 1 million people visit Machu Picchu, making pilgrimages to experience the magnificence of this ancient citadel. Incan agricultural practices, like cultivation in terraces and irrigation systems, continue to be used in the Andes. Local farmers, many of whom are direct descendants of the Incas, maintain these ancestral techniques, demonstrating that the knowledge accumulated for millennia remains relevant and effective. Incan terraces built more than 500 years ago continue to produce abundant harvests, a testimony to the durability and wisdom of Incan design. Although the Mayans, Aztecs, and Incas were distinct civilizations, separated by geography and time, they shared certain fundamental similarities that suggest deep connections in how human beings organize complex societies. All these cultures were polytheistic and attributed great importance to religion in their daily life. They performed human sacrifices and elaborate ceremonies to appease their gods and ensure the prosperity of their communities. The Mayans sacrificed prisoners of war in temples. The Aztecs performed mass sacrifices during important festivals. The Incas performed camelid sacrifices, and on special occasions, human sacrifices of selected youth. Although the methods varied, the underlying belief was similar. The gods required food and reverence to maintain the cosmic order. In terms of social organization, the three civilizations had hierarchical structures with a ruling elite that included kings, nobles, and priests. The Mayans were organized in independent city-states, each with its own ruler and political structure. The Aztecs under the Triple Alliance formed a centralized empire with Tenochtitlan as their capital and a Tlatoani as supreme leader. The Incas established a vast unified empire under the leadership of the Sapa Inca, with Cusco as the administrative and religious center. Despite these differences in political structure, all these civilizations shared the characteristic of having a ruling class that possessed political, religious, and military authority. The rulers were seen not simply as political leaders, but as intermediaries between the gods and the people, responsible for maintaining the cosmic balance. The differences in their cultural and technological achievements are equally notable and revealing. The Mayans excelled in astronomy and mathematics, developing an exact calendar and a sophisticated system of hieroglyphic writing. Their understanding of the concept of zero, independent of any external influence, was an extraordinary mathematical achievement. Their capacity to predict eclipses and track the movements of Venus with precision demonstrates sophisticated astronomical knowledge. The Aztecs, on the other hand, were recognized for their hydraulic engineering and their magnificent capital Tenochtitlan, built on an island in Lake Texcoco. Their system of aqueducts, their floating gardens or chinampas, and their capacity to transform an aquatic terrain into a functional metropolis demonstrates extraordinary engineering ingenuity. The Aztecs also developed a writing system, although less sophisticated than that of the Mayans, that combined pictograms and phonetic glyphs. In contrast, the Incas stood out for their advanced engineering of roads and agricultural terraces, as well as for their skill in the administration of an extensive empire without a conventional writing system. Instead of writing, the Incas used quipus, systems of knots on ropes that served to record numerical and possibly narrative information. Their capacity to govern an empire of millions of people without writing is an extraordinary administrative achievement. Despite these differences, all these civilizations left an enduring legacy that continues to be studied and admired today. Their advances in diverse areas, from agriculture to astronomy, and their complex social and religious structures reflect the cultural diversity and wealth of pre-Columbian America. Modern genetics has provided crucial information about the origins of the indigenous peoples of America that complements and enriches the archaeological record. Genetic studies have shown that there is a clear connection between indigenous American populations and those of Asia, particularly from Siberia and Mongolia. The analysis of mitochondrial DNA has been particularly revealing. Mitochondrial DNA is inherited exclusively from the mother, which means that all members of a maternal family share the same sequence of mitochondrial DNA. Scientists have identified 4 main haplogroups in indigenous American populations: A, B, C, and D. These same haplogroups are found in Siberian and Mongolian populations, suggesting a shared common ancestor. Haplogroup A is the most common in North and South America, while haplogroup B is more common in Central and South America. Haplogroup C is found mainly in North America, while haplogroup D is relatively rare, but is found on both continents. The distribution of these haplogroups suggests that different waves of migration brought different genetic groups to different parts of America. In addition to mitochondrial DNA, the analysis of the Y chromosome has provided additional information. The Y chromosome is inherited by the paternal line and contains information about male ancestry. Studies of the Y chromosome have identified haplogroups like Q and C in indigenous American populations that are also found in Asia. Haplogroup Q is particularly common in America, suggesting that it was brought by the first migrants. Genetic evidence suggests that it was not a single migration, but multiple waves of migration that occurred over thousands of years. The first wave probably arrived 15,000 to 20,000 years ago when the Bering Strait was a land bridge. Later waves continued during the following 10,000 years, bringing different genetic groups to America. Each wave of migration probably brought different groups with their own cultures, technologies, and traditions. The first wave could have consisted of hunters, gatherers, who followed herds of animals. Later waves could have brought groups with more advanced agricultural technologies. This diversity of origins explains the variety of languages, traditions, and physical characteristics that we observe among the indigenous peoples of America. Recent genetic studies have also suggested possible later contacts between Asian and American peoples. Some researchers have identified genetic markers that could indicate contact between populations of the Asian Pacific and South America thousands of years. Although these theories are still in debate, they suggest that the history of human migrations is more complex than previously thought. Genetics has also shed light on the biological adaptations of the indigenous peoples of America to their diverse environments. Genetic variants have been identified that allow for greater efficiency in the production of vitamin D in cold climates, which would have been advantageous for the first migrants who crossed Beringia. Other genetic variants are associated with the ability to digest starch and other foods that were abundant in America. When we examine the evidence from multiple disciplines, a clear image emerges. The indigenous peoples of America have deep roots in Asia, with migrations that occurred during the last glacial age. Genetics, archaeology, anthropology, and linguistics converge to support this conclusion. Genetic evidence provides a molecular clock that allows us to estimate when these migrations occurred. Archaeology provides physical evidence of early settlements and cultural development. Anthropology helps us understand how these peoples adapted to new environments and developed sophisticated cultures. Linguistics reveals connections between indigenous American and Asian languages, suggesting ancestral contact. When all these lines of evidence converge, the conclusion is overwhelming. The indigenous peoples of America descend from Asian migrants who arrived during the last glacial age. But this scientific conclusion does not diminish the magnificence of what these peoples achieved after arriving in America. The history of the Mayans, Aztecs, and Incas is not simply a tale of the past. It is a testimony to the human capacity to innovate, adapt, and thrive in the most challenging environments. These civilizations that emerged from migrations from Asia thousands of years ago developed complex societies, advanced technologies, and deep systems of beliefs that continue to fascinate scholars and admirers around the world. Whether you view their origins through the lens of modern genetics, rigorous archaeology, or biblical narratives, one truth remains constant. These peoples were extraordinary. They built cities that rivaled European metropolises. They developed sophisticated writing systems. They made advances in astronomy and mathematics, and created works of art that continue to inspire admiration. Today, their descendants keep this heritage alive by preserving languages, traditions, and knowledge that connect the present with a glorious past. By studying and valuing these civilizations, we not only enrich our historical knowledge, we also recognize the diversity and wealth of human experience. The truth is that the history of humanity is much more complex and wonderful than many of us learn in school. The indigenous peoples of America were not primitive or backward. They were innovators, visionaries, and builders of civilizations that rivaled any other in the ancient world. The Mayans teach us about the importance of careful observation, mathematical precision, and the search for knowledge. The Aztecs teach us about organization, engineering, and the capacity to transform the terrain to serve our needs. The Incas teach us about efficient administration, adaptation to challenging environments, and the creation of systems that function at a massive scale. If this journey through time and space has inspired you, we invite you to share this video with someone you appreciate. Together, we can keep alive the memory of these great civilizations and continue exploring the mysteries of our shared past. Subscribe to our channel for more content that explores the history, science, and mysteries of humanity. Our mission as content creators is to bring meaningful stories to as many people as possible. Stories that enrich our understanding of the world and connect us with our common roots. We assure you that exploring these ancient civilizations is an experience that you will not want to miss. Comment in the comments section. Which of these 3 civilizations fascinates you most, and why? What aspect of their legacy do you think is most relevant to us today? We want to hear your thoughts and perspectives. Thank you for joining us on this extraordinary journey. Until next time. Have you ever wondered what would happen if colossal creatures dominated our planet? Well, let me tell you something that is going to change your perspective forever. There was a time in history where this was not science fiction, but pure reality. We are talking about the times before the Great Flood, when the Earth was the home of extraordinary beings known as the Nephilim. These entities were not simple giant humans. They were something much more complex and terrifying than you can imagine. Most know the story of Noah's Ark as a tale about animals and torrential rains. But what if I reveal to you that the true motive behind that worldwide catastrophe were precisely these monumental beings? The connection between the Nephilim and the flood hides secrets that few people truly understand. During the next few minutes, you're going to discover a narrative that connects rebel angels, supernatural genetic experiments, and a divine plan to reset humanity. I assure you that by the end of this content, your understanding of the scriptures will never be the same again. But before continuing, I need you to ask yourself this crucial question. If these colossi really walked among us, what implications does this have for everything we think we know about our past? Stay until the end, because we are going to explore evidence that few dare to discuss. To understand completely who the Nephilim were, first we must transport ourselves to a completely different era. The planet that existed before the Great Cataclysm was radically different from the one we inhabit currently. The environmental conditions of that time defy our modern understanding. According to biblical records, the climatic system functioned in a way totally opposite to the current one. Instead of the rainfall that we know, a kind of mist rose from the ground, providing the necessary moisture for all terrestrial vegetation. But here comes what is truly amazing. The human beings of that era possessed a longevity that results in absolutely incredible to us. While we consider it fortunate to reach 80 years, characters like Methuselah reached ages that exceeded 900 years. Imagine the experiences and knowledge that they could accumulate in so much time. However, this extraordinary longevity coexisted with progressive moral degradation. Humanity had begun a descent toward corruption that became more pronounced with each generation. The thoughts and desires of the human heart had turned completely toward evil in a constant way. This somber panorama shows us that the problem did not begin solely with the appearance of the Nephilim, human rebellion. Spiritual distancing and generalized violence had already established the foundations for what would come later. The fascinating thing is how this description of the antediluvian world functions as an atemporal warning. It is as if these ancient events offered us a mirror to reflect on the decisions that we make in our own era. Now we reach the heart of the mystery that has intrigued scholars for millennia. The scriptures mention these beings in a concise way, but that brevity generates more questions than definitive answers. The fundamental passage that describes their origin is found in the book of Genesis, where an extraordinary event is related. When human population began to expand and beautiful women were born, something without precedent occurred. The sons of God found them attractive and decided to take them as wives. This union produced an offspring that would be remembered as the mighty men and men of renown of antiquity. But who exactly were these mysterious sons of God? The most fascinating and controversial interpretation at the same time suggests that it was about angels who had abandoned their original celestial state. These beings, led in their rebellion by Lucifer, had been expelled from the divine kingdom together with a third part of the angelic hosts. Here is where the history becomes truly extraordinary. These fallen angels did not remain confined to the spiritual kingdom. Instead of that, they found the way to manifest themselves physically on earth, adopting human appearances to mix among the population without being detected. Their objective, when uniting with human women, went much further than simple physical desire. They had a much more sinister purpose: to create a hybrid race that would combine celestial characteristics with earthly elements. The Nephilim, resulting from these unions, were not completely human nor totally angelic. They possessed an enormous strength, supernatural abilities, and a physical appearance that distinguished them clearly from ordinary humans. In this current world, we see increasingly more people going against traditional principles, and it seems that the immoral is increasingly present. It is common to feel disoriented and without direction. However, there still exists a path to recover the true essence and re-establish ethical principles in our daily routine. If you feel lost in the midst of confusion and desire more clarity, we have something special for you. A resource created especially to help you understand the meaning of these current challenges and face them with wisdom and courage. This is the true value of Paths of Revelation. Deciphering the Bible completely. A path toward clarity and serenity through its teachings. The best of all is that it is available now in the first pinned comment. Do not miss this opportunity to transform your life and discover the genuine purpose of these challenges. Now let us return to the main topic of the video. Their dual nature would explain later legends about demigods and mythological heroes in diverse cultures. To understand completely the motivation behind these events, we need to examine the mastermind behind everything, Lucifer himself. His expulsion from heaven had not extinguished his ambition to rival the Almighty. The plan that he conceived was of an extraordinary diabolical astuteness. Lucifer knew something that few understand. He knew that the promised Messiah would come to the world through a woman being born as a common and ordinary human, but carrying the divine essence. This revelation was the spark that ignited his strategy. If God could incarnate his spirit in a normal human being, why could he not attempt the same? The Nephilim represented his perverted version of this idea, to create his own children who would carry his evil influence in physical form. Just as Jesus would be known as the Son of God, the Nephilim became the sons of evil. This was the satanic imitation of the divine plan of redemption, designed to corrupt and destroy instead of saving and restoring. By contaminating the human lineage in this way, Lucifer attacked directly the creation of God, attempting to break the bond between humanity and its creator. The result was a world where evil not only dominated, but had been institutionalized through these hybrid beings. But before, share this video with someone you appreciate. Our greatest mission on earth is to spread the word of the Lord. Did you know that many people lack knowledge for lack of adequate content? Send it to that WhatsApp group or publish it on Facebook. I am sure that you will not regret it. And if you like videos like this, comment below, "I want more." That way, I will know if you really enjoy it, and I will definitely bring new similar content. The Nephilim were not simply powerful individuals acting in an isolated way. They became leaders, cultural influencers, and figures of authority that shaped entire societies. Their supernatural strength and extraordinary abilities allowed them to control entire populations, promoting a culture based on violence, oppression, and distorted worship. Ancient texts that are not part of the biblical canon, like the Book of Enoch, describe how these fallen angels transmitted forbidden knowledge to humanity: magical arts, astrology, manufacturing of weapons of war, and manipulation of nature. Although these writings do not have canonical authority, they offer an intriguing perspective on how ancient civilizations understood the influence of these beings. With the Nephilim established as dominant figures, the Earth experienced a catastrophic transformation. Their presence accelerated exponentially the moral and spiritual degradation that had already begun. Imagine a world where beings of stature and supernatural power occupied all positions of influence. Their physical superiority guaranteed them control through fear, intimidation, and, in many cases, literal worship by human populations that saw them as incarnated divinities. This distorted worship fed a vicious cycle of spiritual corruption. Humans not only had abandoned their relationship with the true Creator, but now directed their devotion toward these hybrid beings that represented everything opposite to divine holiness. The violence that these giants promoted was not limited solely to conflicts between humans, according to ancient accounts. They also experimented with divine creation, producing aberrations that mixed different animal species and distorted the natural order established by God. The question that arises naturally is, why did God permit this situation to go so far? Could He not have intervened before to eliminate these giants or the fallen angels responsible? The answer can be found in a fundamental principle: free will. Both angels and humans were created with the capacity to choose their own path. This freedom resulted in decisions that challenged completely the original purpose of God for His creation. However, as we will see, the Creator was not willing to permit this rebellion to continue indefinitely. He already had prepared a plan to restore the earth and end this corrupted world once and for all. While the earth sank increasingly into darkness, the heart of God was filled with sadness, but His determination to restore His creation remained unshakable. In the midst of all this corruption, there was a man who stood out for his righteousness: Noah. The moment that God revealed His plan to Noah marked a turning point in human history. It was an apparently ordinary day when the voice of the Almighty resonated in the life of this righteous man, changing forever the course of his existence. "Noah," said the Lord, "listen carefully to my words. The final moment has arrived for every living creature. The earth overflows with violence due to the actions of men, and I have decided to destroy them together with everything they have corrupted. I will send devastating waters to eliminate every form of life that breathes under the heavens. Everything that exists on the earth will perish." The impact of these words on Noah was overwhelming. He fell on his knees, trembling with reverence and fear, while he processed the magnitude of what he had heard. With a trembling voice, he answered, "Lord, what do you wish that I do? How can I serve your will?" The answer of God was specific and detailed. Build a massive vessel using cypress wood, create compartments in its interior, and cover it completely with pitch, both from the inside and from the outside. The dimensions will be exactly these: 300 cubits of length, 50 of width, and 30 of height. Install a window and a door and build 3 levels: lower, middle, and upper. Noah remained in silence, absorbing each instruction, but his expression revealed a deep concern. Finally, he asked, "Lord, will a total destruction really occur? Will there be no forgiveness for any human being? Men have saturated the earth with violence," answered God. "Everything that exists will be destroyed, but with you I will establish my covenant. You, your wife, your sons, and their wives will enter the vessel. From each animal species you will preserve a pair, male and female, to maintain life. Also store sufficient provisions for all of you," with tears running down his face. Noah answered, "Lord, I will fulfill exactly what you have ordered, but grant me the necessary strength to carry out your will." Those words marked the start of the most grandiose mission ever undertaken by a human being. God had provided precise instructions to build the largest vessel ever conceived, with exact dimensions that would defy the engineering of any era. Imagine Noah, a man fearing God, receiving these instructions in an era where technology and the knowledge of naval construction were extremely rudimentary. With the help of his family, he began the monumental task of giving life to this divine vision. Each piece of cut wood, each placed nail, each assembled section represented one more step toward the fulfillment of the divine promise. But the challenge barely began. While Noah and his sons worked tirelessly, the reactions of the surrounding population were of mockery and total contempt. The spectacle of a gigantic vessel being built on completely dry land was incomprehensible to the mentality of the era. After all, who in their right mind would build a boat in a place where water was practically non-existent? People laughed openly, questioned the mental sanity of Noah, and considered him completely delirious. However, Noah persisted without becoming discouraged, sustained by the certainty that his obedience to the Lord would guarantee salvation. His wife, although she was a woman of deep faith, struggled with her own fears and questions. She observed her husband dedicating endless hours to the construction of this massive vessel, while she also perceived the hostile and suspicious looks of the community. His sons, called by God to assist in this mission, faced their own personal challenges. Their normal lives were being sacrificed for a plan that no one else seemed to understand or respect. The work was physically exhausting and emotionally challenging. But each day that passed, the structure took a more defined form, and the faith of Noah and his family strengthened proportionally. The construction of the ark did not represent only an exhausting physical mission. It was fundamentally a spiritual journey, a form of cultivating and deepening the trust in God through practical action. Although the scriptures do not specify exactly how much time Noah required to complete the construction, the biblical text indicates that God granted humanity 120 years before the flood occurred. The most widely accepted interpretation suggests that Noah invested approximately this complete period in the construction of the vessel. But this time was not dedicated exclusively to carpentry and engineering. Simultaneously, Noah functioned as a preacher and constantly warned people about the imminent divine judgment. For more than a century, this righteous man proclaimed the message of repentance and salvation to a generation that had completely hardened itself against the voice of God. Imagine the superhuman dedication required to maintain both the physical construction and the prophetic ministry for so long. Each day represented a new opportunity for humanity to reconsider its path. But also each day that passed confirmed their obstinate rejection of the divine call. Finally, after decades of tireless work, the massive vessel was completely finished. Noah and his family gathered around their masterpiece when God spoke to them again. "Noah, enter the vessel together with all your family, because I have recognized you as righteous before me in this generation. From every animal considered clean, you will take 7 pairs, male and female. Of the animals considered impure, only a pair. Also from the birds of the sky carry 7 pairs to preserve each species on the earth. God also revealed to Noah exactly how the animals should enter the vessel. He ordered him to gather a representative sample of all animal species, both clean and impure, a male and a female of each type. This task seemed even more impossible than the construction itself, for Noah did not need to chase the animals. The own divine hand would guide each creature toward the vessel. When the designated moment arrived, something absolutely extraordinary occurred. God ordered that the animals of all species begin to gather spontaneously. The scene that developed was a visible miracle of order and divine control over all creation. Animals of all forms, sizes, and temperaments began to approach the ark from all directions. Imagine this spectacle without precedent. Massive herds of elephants, majestic tigers, powerful lions, elegant giraffes, exotic birds of bright colors, small agile rodents, and even tiny insects, all headed toward the vessel that Noah had built with so much effort, guided supernaturally by the Lord. Each species, in an almost magical way, found its way toward the great vessel. One by one, they entered the ark in an orderly and peaceful way. The birds flew directly toward the designated openings. The land animals marched along the ramps specially built by Noah. The sound was indescribable, footsteps resonating against the ground, rhythmic fluttering. The complete symphony of natural sounds mixing with the whistling of the wind. It was as if all creation breathed with anticipated expectation, conscious that something monumentally important was about to happen. The people who had ridiculed Noah for more than a century, upon witnessing this supernatural parade of animals heading toward the vessel, perhaps began to question for the first time the reality of what was occurring. How was it possible that wild and domestic animals, predators and prey, followed obediently in formation toward a unique destination? After all the designated animals were safe inside the vessel, God addressed Noah once more with final instructions. In exactly 7 days from now, I will make it rain on the earth during 40 days and 40 nights consecutively. I will eliminate from the terrestrial surface everything that I have created. Remain inside the vessel until I call you again to exit, inside the ark. The environment was simultaneously chaotic and peaceful in an inexplicable way. The animals were there protected, but the coexistence in such a limited space presented unique challenges. However, by some mystery of divine providence, all these creatures so different coexisted in perfect harmony. There was no violence. There were no hunters chasing prey. Natural instincts seemed to have been suspended miraculously. The divine intervention was so evident that even the most hardened skeptics could not deny it completely. But despite this supernatural demonstration, the majority of the population remained indifferent and defiant until the end. When all the designated beings were in their place, something deeply symbolic occurred. The door of the ark was closed by God himself, not by Noah. The hand of the Lord sealed the vessel, completing thus the preparations for the judgment that was about to come. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and the wives of his sons were finally ready to face the most catastrophic event in human history. God had chosen them to represent a new beginning for humanity. But what would come later would be something that no human being had ever experienced. The final reaction of the population was of total incredulity, mixed with growing anxiety. They could no longer do anything to change their destiny. The time for repentance had definitely expired, and the flood was about to begin. The flood that followed was described as a simultaneous breaking of the fountains, of the great deep, and the windows of heaven. This description suggests a catastrophe of cosmic proportions, where the waters erupted both from the underground depths and from the celestial heights. Imagine the absolute chaos. massive torrents of water emerging violently from underground sources, while simultaneously colossal waterfalls descended from the heights, flooding the earth with a completely implacable force. The sound must have been deafening, the waters dragging everything in their path, roaring as if creation itself were screaming in pain. Centenary trees, imposing mountains, animals in panic, and all human constructions disappeared progressively under the overwhelming torrent. The world that before pulsed with life now was seen consumed by death, transformed into an infinite ocean of destruction where absolutely nothing could escape. But in the midst of this universal catastrophe, Noah's Ark remained as an unshakable fortress of hope. It floated serenely over the turbulent waters, not by merits of human engineering, but exclusively by the protective grace of God. Noah and his family were protected not by their own works or merits, but by their absolute trust and unconditional obedience to the divine plan. They were safe because they had deposited their faith in God, even when all the world that surrounded them had chosen incredulity. The experience inside the ark during the flood represented an emotional and spiritual challenge that cannot be underestimated. Noah and his family faced a test of faith that defied all human limits. They were completely surrounded by a world in the process of total destruction, separated from everything they had previously known. The deep solitude and the sepulchral silence of the waters became their only companions while they waited patiently for the end of what seemed to be the definitive end of a complete era. The constant sounds of the water hitting against the hull of the vessel reminded them continuously of the devastating reality of what was occurring on the exterior. The animals, despite being completely out of their natural habitats, also remained under the supernatural protection of God. It is amazing to imagine how lions, normally fierce predators, lived peacefully with defenseless lambs in the same limited vessel, without recording even a single incident of aggression. The birds, accustomed to the unlimited freedom of flight, now found themselves confined in a closed, but completely safe environment. In some mysterious and inexplicable way, the hand of God maintained a supernatural peace inside the entire vessel, even among the cacophony of diverse animal sounds and the constant roar of the external waters. There existed an internal harmony that could only be explained through direct divine grace. It was as if God had temporarily suspended natural laws to preserve life inside this floating refuge. After the first days of the flood, when the waters still covered the terrestrial surface completely, Noah observed anxiously through the windows of the vessel, searching for any sign that the divine judgment was coming to an end. Something deep in his spirit told him that hope still remained alive. Determined to find a concrete confirmation, Noah released a dove for the first time, watching it disappear gradually into the infinite immensity of the waters that extended to the horizon. What he sought desperately was for this dove to return, carrying some evidence that the waters were beginning to recede. The silence that followed the departure of the dove was tremendously heavy and agonizing. Each second seemed to extend like an endless eternity. But then, when hope began to fade, something extraordinary happened. The dove returned, and in its small beak, it carried carefully a fresh olive leaf. Noah's heart accelerated instantly upon seeing this divine sign. It was the confirmation he had been waiting for. The waters were definitely receding, and the earth was beginning to emerge again from its aquatic grave. With faith completely renewed by this tangible evidence, Noah decided to release the dove a second time, waiting with anxiety even greater than before. But this time the dove did not return to the ark, and it was precisely at that moment that Noah understood completely. The earth was sufficiently dry and ready to be inhabited again. The end of the flood was finally within his hands. Noah contemplated his family, observing faces tired by the long wait, but filled with renewed hope. They were completely ready to abandon the vessel, But the wait had not yet finished completely. The deep silence of the calmed waters still resonated inside the great vessel. For several additional days, Noah continued waiting patiently, praying constantly and reflecting deeply, awaiting the exact moment that God would determine as appropriate for their liberation. The patience he had demonstrated during the construction now extended until these final moments. Finally, when the waters finished receding completely and the mountains and valleys became clearly visible again, the ark rested gently on Mount Ararat. It was then that Noah heard once more the familiar and comforting voice of God, calling him, "Noah, exit the vessel. You, your wife, your sons, and their wives. Free also all the animals, so that they disperse throughout the earth and be fruitful and multiply abundantly." Noah knelt reverently before the open door of the ark and expressed his gratitude. "Lord, your infinite mercy sustained us during all this time. I praise you eternally for your unshakable faithfulness." God responded with a promise that would resonate throughout all human history. "I will place my multicolored bow in the clouds as a visible sign of the covenant that I establish with you and with every living creature. I will never again destroy the earth with floodwaters. Multiply yourselves and fill the earth again." Noah, his family, and all the animals were finally prepared to restart life, restoring and rebuilding what had been completely lost. The rainbow was established as the visible and permanent sign of this divine covenant, reminding all future generations that, despite the occasional need for judgment, the mercy of God would always prevail ultimately. The world now extended before them, no longer corrupted by the presence of the Nephilim, but clean and purified, completely ready to be rebuilt under the direct guidance of God. This new opportunity represented a complete reset of humanity. The divine response to the chaos generated by the Nephilim constitutes an extraordinarily powerful lesson for all generations. God did not simply eliminate the evil that had infected his creation, but provided humanity a new, completely fresh opportunity to live in harmonious communion with him. The Nephilim serve as a permanent example of the consequences that arise when divine limits are violated deliberately. On the other hand, the complete story of Noah functions as a powerful metaphor for all of us currently, even in the darkest moments of history, when evil seems to prevail completely and hope seems lost. The grace of God continues to offer a viable path of salvation and total renewal. Noah was not a perfect man, but his genuine willingness to obey and trust completely in God was sufficient to guarantee the salvation of all his family. Do you know what is the most revealing and disturbing aspect of this entire narrative? Even after the universal flood and the complete elimination of the corruption represented by the Nephilim, humanity did not experience a fundamental change in its nature. The history repeated itself one more time, but this time with a different outcome. God destroyed 2 entire cities with fire and brimstone, poured directly from heaven, demonstrating that his patience, although immense, has defined limits. This history of cities corrupted by sin, where God acted without apparent mercy, reminds us that divine justice eventually prevails. This leads us to a deep reflection on our current era. We are repeating the same patterns of rebellion, corruption, and distancing from God that characterized both the antediluvian period and the cities that were destroyed subsequently. The history of the Nephilim and the flood is not simply a fascinating historical tale. It is an atemporal warning about the consequences of abandoning divine principles and permitting corruption to spread without control through our societies. However, it is also a story of extraordinary hope. It reminds us that regardless of how dark the circumstances become, regardless of how prevalent evil seems to be, God never abandons his people completely. He always preserves a faithful remnant. He always provides a path of escape. He always maintains alive the possibility of restoration and a new beginning. This is the eternal promise that resonates throughout all human history. He never abandons those who deposit their trust in him. Even in the most desperate and apparently hopeless times, divine faithfulness remains constant. Regardless of how many times humanity chooses the path of rebellion, the history continues to unfold, and each generation faces the same fundamental choice that the contemporaries of Noah faced: to trust in God and follow his ways, or to reject his authority and suffer the consequences. The decision remains ours. Here arises a question that has troubled scholars for centuries. If the flood eliminated completely all the Nephilim, how is it possible that we find later references to giants in the scriptures? The answer to this question leads us through a path even more mysterious than what you could imagine. Some experts suggest that the genetic corruption introduced by the fallen angels was not completely eradicated. It is possible that certain traces of this alteration had survived through the wives of Noah's sons, or that the fallen angels attempted to repeat their experiment after the flood. What we know with certainty is that generations after Noah, giants appeared again in human history, but this time their presence was more localized, concentrated in specific regions like the land of Canaan. It was as if God had permitted some of these beings to remain as a test for his chosen people. The tribe of Anak, the Rephaim, the Emim, and other groups of giants mentioned in the scriptures were living evidence that the battle between light and darkness had not ended with the flood. These beings continued to represent the same spiritual challenge as their antediluvian predecessors. Among all these giants after the flood, none is better known than Goliath of Gath. This Philistine warrior represented everything that the Nephilim symbolized: enormous physical power, unmeasured arrogance, and direct defiance against the people of God. When Goliath presented himself in the valley of Elah, he was not simply a large soldier facing an army. He was the physical manifestation of a malignant spiritual force that sought to intimidate and destroy the faith of the chosen people. His stature of more than 3 meters and his armor, which weighed tens of kilos, converted him into a truly terrifying figure. During 40 consecutive days, this giant defied the Israelites, mocking their God and provoking terror in their hearts. It was as if the echo of the antediluvian Nephilim resonated again through his threatening voice. No Israelite warrior dared to face him because they saw in him something more than a simple human enemy. But then appeared David, a young shepherd who understood something that the veteran soldiers had forgotten. The battle is not fought with physical strength, but with unshakable faith. When David declared that he would come against Goliath in the name of the Lord of hosts, he was invoking the same power that had preserved Noah during the flood. The stone that David threw with his sling was not simply a physical projectile. It was an instrument of divine justice, guided by the same hand that had closed the door of the ark. The fall of Goliath represented the eternal victory of faith over brute force, of humility over arrogance. The fascinating thing is that the stories about giants are not limited solely to biblical records. Practically all ancient civilizations preserve legends about beings of colossal stature that once inhabited the earth. From the Greek Titans to the Nordic Jotuns, from the Hebrew Nephilim to the giants of Native American traditions. This universality suggests that these were not simply independent mythological creations, but collective memories of real events that impacted all humanity. It is as if each culture had preserved fragments of the same fundamental history about these extraordinary beings. The ancient Sumerian texts speak of the Anunnaki, beings that descended from heaven and mixed with humanity. The Egyptians had their own versions about gods that took human form. The Greeks narrated the wars between titans and gods. All these traditions seem to reflect aspects of the same primordial reality. Even in America, much before any contact with the traditions of the Middle East, the indigenous peoples told stories about giants that once dominated their lands. The builders of the North American mounds left evidence of structures that seemed designed for beings of stature much greater than the normal human. Throughout the centuries, archaeological discoveries have appeared that have fueled the debate about the historical existence of these giants. Skeletons of extraordinary dimensions, tools too large for normal human hands, and megalithic structures that defy our understanding of ancient technological capabilities. Many of these findings have been controversial. Some disappeared mysteriously from museums and universities. Others were discarded as anomalies or errors of measurement. But the quantity and consistency of these reports throughout different eras and geographic regions results difficult to ignore completely. Sites like Baalbek in Lebanon, with their blocks of stone that weigh hundreds of tons, pose disturbing questions about who had the capacity to move such masses. The Nazca lines in Peru, visible only from great heights, suggest knowledge and perspectives that transcend normal human limitations. Structures like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, built more than 11,000 years ago, demonstrate capabilities of engineering and social organization that contradict our assumptions about prehistoric civilizations. It is as if there had existed a lost technology, knowledge that vanished together with those who possessed them. A question that arises naturally is, why is this information not taught widely in conventional educational institutions? Why does there exist an apparent resistance to explore seriously the possibility that these beings have really existed? Part of the answer can be found in the philosophical and theological implications that such acceptance would entail. If the Nephilim were real, if fallen angels really mixed with humanity, then all our understanding about history, evolution, and the origin of civilizations would have to be re-examined fundamentally. Furthermore, recognizing the historical reality of these events would require also recognizing the spiritual dimension of human existence. In an age where secular materialism dominates academic institutions, such admissions would represent a direct challenge to established paradigms. There also exists the possibility that certain groups of power have an interest in keeping this information hidden. If humanity understood completely its true origin and purpose, if it understood the reality of the spiritual war that is waged constantly around us, this could alter fundamentally the existing social control structures. When we analyze our current era, it results disturbing to observe how many parallels exist with the antediluvian world described in the scriptures. Generalized violence, moral corruption, rebellion against divine principles, and the obsessive search for power and pleasure seem to reflect exactly the conditions that prevailed before the flood. Today, we see attempts to genetically manipulate human life, experiments that seek to transcend the natural limitations of the human body, and a growing fascination with the idea of mixing the human with the artificial through technology. Do not these ambitions sound surprisingly similar to what the fallen angels attempted to achieve through their hybridization with humanity? Modern worship of superheroes, the obsession with supernatural beings in entertainment, and the constant search for power and longevity reflect the same desires that led antediluvian humanity along the path of corruption. It is as if we were unconsciously recreating the conditions that once provoked divine judgment. Social networks and modern technology have created a global connectivity that facilitates the rapid propagation of both good and evil. Just as the Nephilim could influence entire cultures in their era, today we see how destructive ideologies can expand instantly through digital platforms. Prophetic scriptures suggest that the days before the return of Christ will be as in the days of Noah. This comparison does not refer solely to generalized evil, but possibly also to the return of supernatural phenomena similar to those that characterized the antediluvian era. Modern reports about UFO sightings, encounters with unidentified beings, and inexplicable paranormal phenomena could be contemporary manifestations of the same activity of fallen angels that once produced the Nephilim. The difference is that now these entities operate in a more subtle way, disguising their nature behind apparently scientific explanations. The growing interest in extraterrestrial contact, the search for intelligent life in the universe, and the fascination with the possibility of human-alien hybridization reflect exactly the same temptations that led to antediluvian corruption. Humanity continues seeking to transcend its limitations through union with superior beings. Even the development of artificial intelligence and advanced robotics can be seen as a modern attempt to create beings that combine human and non-human elements, casting thus an unsettling parallel with the experiments of the fallen angels. The history of the Nephilim teaches us that the fundamental battle of humanity is not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual principalities and powers. Physical giants were simply visible manifestations of an invisible war that is waged in dimensions that transcend the material. Today, that same war continues, although the manifestations may be different. Modern giants could be systems of thought, ideology destructivas, corrupt power structures, or spiritual influences that seek to push humanity away from its creator, just as David defeated Goliath with armor and sword, but with faith and dependence on God. We must recognize that our contemporary battles require spiritual weapons more than merely human solutions. Prayer, faith, and obedience to divine principles remain more powerful than any physical force. The key is to recognize that we are part of a narrative much larger than what we can perceive with our limited senses. Each decision that we make, each value that we embrace, each action that we perform has implications in this cosmic war between good and evil. The history of the Nephilim and the flood is not simply an ancient history lesson. It contains atemporal principles that can guide our daily decisions in the modern world. It teaches us about the consequences of distancing ourselves from divine principles and the importance of maintaining spiritual purity. When we face temptations to compromise our values, when we feel pressured to conform to declining moral standards, or when we are tempted to seek power and satisfaction through questionable means, we can remember the destiny of the antediluvian generation. The patience of Noah during more than a century of construction and preaching teaches us about perseverance in the midst of incredulity and rejection. His unshakable obedience, even when everyone around him considered him a fanatic, shows us the value of remaining firm in our convictions. Divine provision during the flood reminds us that God cares for those who trust in him, even in the most extreme circumstances. The supernatural harmony among the animals inside the ark teaches us that God can create peace even in apparently impossible situations. If we are really living in times similar to the days of Noah, then spiritual vigilance becomes crucial. We need to develop discernment to recognize the spiritual influences that operate in our world and the wisdom to respond appropriately. This means being attentive to the signs of the times without falling into paranoia or extremism. It requires maintaining a balanced perspective that recognizes both the reality of spiritual evil and the ultimate sovereignty of God over all human history. It also means preparing ourselves spiritually to face challenges that could be even greater than those that previous generations faced. Just as Noah prepared himself physically building the ark, we must prepare ourselves spiritually, cultivating our relationship with God and strengthening our faith. Preparation includes also the development of solid faith communities, mutual support relationships, and the transmission of this knowledge to future generations. We need to be both preservers of the truth and proclaimers of hope. Although the history of the Nephilim and the flood contains elements of judgment and destruction, its fundamental message is of hope and renewal. It reminds us that regardless of how dark the circumstances become, God always has a plan for restoration. The rainbow that appeared after the flood was not simply a beautiful celestial decoration. It was a tangible promise that divine mercy always triumphs over judgment, that grace is available for those who seek it, and that each end represents also a new beginning. This hope extends beyond historical events to touch our personal lives, regardless of how many mistakes we have committed, how many times we have failed, or how far we have distanced ourselves from the correct path. The possibility of renewal and restoration always remains available. The history continues to unfold, and each one of us has a role to play in it. We can choose to be part of the problem or part of the solution, contribute to the chaos or work for restoration, be influenced by the forces of darkness, or convert ourselves into agents of light. Noah's legacy challenges us to live with eternal purpose, to make decisions based on principles that transcend temporary trends, and to maintain hope even when we face giants that seem impossible to overcome. Because in the end, the victory always belongs to those who trust in the one who is greater than any giant. Imagine for a moment that for centuries, humanity has been asking the wrong question. Thousands of theologians, preachers, and sincere believers have tried to decipher a mystery that perhaps they never understood completely. The question about the identity of the Holy Spirit has generated more confusion than clarity, more theories than certainties. What if I told you that everything you thought you knew needs to be re-examined from scratch? In a world obsessed with supernatural experiences, spectacular manifestations, and mystical phenomena, there exists a truth so simple that it results revolutionary. The Holy Spirit is not what the majority thinks he is. During entire generations, this divine figure has been misinterpreted, reduced to vague symbols and emotional experiences. Many see him as a kind of cosmic energy that is activated in special moments, like a mystical wind that appears and disappears, or as an impersonal force that responds to certain rituals. Biblical reality destroys each one of these mistaken perceptions. What the scriptures reveal is so profound that it transforms completely our understanding of divinity itself. We are not talking about a minor part of a theological puzzle, but the third person of the Trinity in all his glory and majesty. When Peter confronted Ananias in the book of Acts, his declaration was devastating. To deceive the Holy Spirit equates to deceiving God himself. This was not a rhetorical exaggeration, nor a poetic metaphor. It was the revelation of an absolute truth that many prefer to ignore because of its immense implication. Let us go back to the exact moment where everything began. Before light existed, before the stars were placed in their place, before life breathed for the first time, there was already someone working in silence. The text of Genesis presents us with an extraordinary image: the Spirit of God moving over the primordial waters. Here we do not see a passive observer contemplating the chaos. We see an active agent preparing the stage for the most spectacular creation of all time. His presence was not accidental or secondary. It was fundamental for everything that was to come. This same Spirit who organized the cosmos from the beginning continues operating today with the same authority and purpose. He is not a historical memory of past eras, but a present reality that continues transforming, creating, and ordering everything he touches. Throughout the centuries, humanity has attempted to reduce this majestic presence to comprehensible metaphors: fire, wind, water, dove. But these images, although beautiful, have obscured the central truth. He is not simply a temporal manifestation. He is an eternal, conscious, sensitive, and completely divine person. His work is not limited to convincing of sin or revealing spiritual truths. He is the one who guides hearts toward salvation, who seals the redeemed for eternity, and who makes it possible for finite mortals to understand infinite realities. When Jesus prepared to leave this world, he did not console his disciples with vague promises or sentimental hopes. He announced to them something that would change forever: the human experience with the divine. He promised them someone who would be even better than having Christ himself physically present. This declaration must have resulted incomprehensible for minds that had walked with the Son of God, that had witnessed extraordinary miracles, and heard teachings that transformed their lives. How could someone be superior to incarnate Jesus? The answer revealed the extraordinary nature of the Holy Spirit. He would not come as an inferior substitute, but as God himself in a completely new dimension of intimacy and presence. While Jesus had been with them externally, the Spirit would be in them permanently. This transition marked the start of an era where divine presence would no longer be limited to occasional encounters on sacred mountains or specific temples. The same God who had spoken from the burning bush now would inhabit inside human hearts, transforming them into living temples. The Spirit does not descend upon people like a ray of external energy. He approaches like someone who wishes to establish a permanent residence, like an intimate friend who seeks constant communion. His method is not noisy imposition, but gentle but irresistible invitation. Through him, words written on ancient parchments come to life in the present. By means of his action, the voice of the eternal becomes comprehensible for finite minds. Without his presence, there exists no possibility of true revelation, genuine repentance, or authentic transformation. While the majority of people can visualize easily God as Father or conceptualize Jesus as the Son sent, in this current world, we see increasingly more people going against traditional principles, and it seems that the immoral is increasingly present. It is common to feel disoriented and without direction. However, there still exists a path to recover the true essence and re-establish ethical principles in our daily routine. If you feel lost in the midst of confusion and desire more clarity, we have something special for you, a resource created especially to help you understand the meaning of these current challenges and face them with wisdom and courage. This is the true value of Paths of Revelation, deciphering the Bible completely, a path toward clarity and serenity through its teachings. The best of all is that it is available now in the first pinned comment. Do not miss this opportunity to transform your life and discover the genuine purpose of these challenges. Now let us return to the main topic of the video. The Holy Spirit remains wrapped in a mist of misunderstandings. This confusion is not accidental. It is the result of centuries of inadequate teaching and distorted experiences. Many have reduced the Spirit to a spiritual atmosphere that can be generated in certain environments. Others see him as a force that is activated solely during moments of intense religious emotion. Some consider him an emergency resource for desperate situations, while others treat him as a phenomenon exclusive to charismatic meetings. This entire impoverished vision has deprived entire generations of the true relationship with who is in fact the same living God in direct action. The Holy Spirit is not an optional complement to make Christianity more exciting. He is the absolute center of every authentic Christian experience. From the first chapters of the Bible to the last, he appears with absolute authority, revealing the immutable character of God, performing works that defy all human logic, and directing the eternal plan of salvation with sovereign precision. His action precedes the formation of the visible world and continues until this moment, sustaining everything with the same power that originally gave life to the universe. This continuous and intentional performance is what distinguishes the Spirit from any impersonal or abstract concept that the human mind can create. The works that the Scriptures attribute to the Holy Spirit are not poetic metaphors nor spiritual symbolisms. They are concrete realities that only absolute divinity can execute. He is the one who resurrects the dead, according to the unequivocal declaration of Romans. When the biblical text affirms that the same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead inhabits in the believers, it is not speaking in figurative terms. This is a literal promise with eternal implications that transcend all human understanding. Only God possesses absolute authority over death, and the Spirit is the direct agent of that victory. There is no power in the universe that can compete with his capacity to generate life where only death exists, to create order where chaos reigns, to produce beauty where destruction prevails. Peter's confrontation with Ananias about the lie regarding the sale of a property was not a common religious reprimand. It was a devastating revelation that exposed the true identity of the Spirit. To lie to the Spirit is to lie directly to God, because He is God in essence, not in temporary or ministerial function. This direct and unequivocal declaration destroys any attempt to reduce the Spirit to something inferior to full divinity. He is not a temporary manifestation of divine power. He is the permanent and eternal presence of God Himself among us. In the Old Testament, the Spirit manifested itself in a specific and temporary way upon selected individuals: kings, prophets, priests. These manifestations were powerful, but limited in duration and scope. The new dispensation inaugurated by Christ changed all this in a radical way. After the Lord's ascension, the Spirit passed to inhabit continuously in all who believe. This is not a symbolic or emotional presence. It is the real residence of God in human hearts. The promise of Jesus that the Spirit would inhabit with us and would be in us is fulfilled literally each day. If the Holy Spirit is truly God, then everything that He communicates, orders, reveals, and inspires possesses absolute divine authority. His voice is not a friendly suggestion. It is a celestial decree. His movement is not a recommendation. It is a direct manifestation of heaven on earth. The contemporary church needs desperately to recover this reverence and awareness that being in the presence of the Spirit means being before God Himself.